Hello and welcome to this Guardian Live event. I'm Gary Younge, Professor of Sociology at the University of Manchester and formerly a columnist for The Guardian. In 2018, Steve McQueen invited every primary school in London to be part of a giant collective portrait. The result was Year 3, a large-scale installation featuring more than 3,000 class photos of about 76,000 school children, which formed a major exhibition at the Tate and was also displayed on over 600 billboards across London's 33 boroughs. The project's photographers captured the full range of the capital's 7- and 8-year-old citizenry, from state, private, religious and special education schools, uniformed, non-uniformed, the daffy grins, the big ears, long braids, scuffed shoes, iron headscarves and wild afros. Shortly before it came out, I spoke with Steve, and he told me it's a telescope and a microscope situation, was how he described it. He said, you're looking through a telescope and seeing all these people, but it's also reflecting back on you and making you think, who am I in all of this? It's exciting and dynamic. I hope the people and the powers that be are aware of that potential and reap from it. I find it inspiring. The future is in those pictures. There's going to be the criminal, the banker, and the person who may not make it to 21. They are all there. And that is what we're going to talk about tonight. Now, the Tate has produced a new exhibition book, which documents the exhibition and brings together over 300 of its photos, as well as several essays, including one by Professor Paul Gilroy, who is also with us tonight. So let me introduce our panel this evening. First, a warm welcome to Steve McQueen, Turner Prize winning visual artist and filmmaker. He won the Best Picture Oscar for his third feature film, 12 Years a Slave. And more recently, he created and directed the widely praised anthology series, Small Acts, which told stories about the lives of West Indian immigrants in London and their children. Also, we have Maria Balshaw, who's been director of the Tate since 2017, is the first woman to hold that post. And last but not least, we are joined by Professor Paul Gilroy, director of the Centre for the Study of Race and Racism at the University College London. Now, before I ask my first question, we'll be talking for around 45 minutes. We want to hear from you too. So send us your questions via the Q&A button, and we'll answer as many as we can in the last section of the event. And if you like, do tell us your name and where you are joining us from. So I want to start with you, Steve. The kind of obvious, but in a way, kind of urgent question, where did this idea, so simple and yet so powerful, where did it come from?
I think it came from a number of, well, it came from that first photograph of me as a 7-year-old, which is actually in the book. It's been a journey of 50 odd years to come back to that, and wanting to find out where I am, who I am, and where I came from. In a way, it was a sort of going back in order to go forwards. Because often is the case, you forget about the past and you forget about so many things because you're so hard, you're running and striving to get to where you want. And as soon as you sort of feel that you found some place, that you feel that you have arrived at where you feel that is a place that you wanted, but often is a place that you're a bit unsure of, you sort of reel back and to find out, how did I get here? Who am I? And what has changed? And again, where are the people that were around me at that time? And you sort of look back at all the people that sort of helped you to get to where you were, but at the same time, it's just about the environment that created you. And I just wanted to get back to that. And I think the only place that I could do that was going back to that photograph, and how, I mean, this is the photograph which is on screen. This is it. This is the photograph, and I am in the second row. If you're looking at it, if you look at it from the left, I'm the fifth on the left with the guy with the gray shirt without the tie, next to a guy on my left called Guy Nichols. The guy on my right, I don't know, but the other guy next to him, the black guy, is a guy called Stephen Lovelace. And my best friend was a guy called, another guy who was called Guy Ricks. And Guy Ricks is at the end of the second row, the last person. And in front of him is a guy called Mark Carrington, who is no longer with us anymore. It was a wonderful school. It was a wonderful school. As you can see, it was a wonderful school of so many different kinds of people. And I just wanted to find out what was going on now. Who was I now, today? And that's all. That's why I want to take those photographs. Who was I now today? Who would I have been? Who would I have been now at this moment in time? Has things gotten better or have things gotten worse? That's all.
So, I mean, it's a fascinating notion of the past on the one hand, and if we could see the picture of the same school now, it's
very different.
Picture of the past and the present all kind of rolled into one. And when you do look at that now, can you see yourself in there? It does look very different.
No, I can't really. No.
So it was an effort to kind of project, if you like, this notion of who you were and who you are, but on a grand scale, taking the whole capital in, which I do think the scale of it, we could just talk about that for a moment, because the scale of it is quite breathtaking. When you walk into that room, into that chamber, and you see the vastness, you're kind of dwarfed in a way by the size of London and by the size of the project.
Yeah, I just wanted to have a go at photographing every school in London, because that was important too, and also to have everyone on the same starting line, because that's apparently when you go to school at that age, everyone's on the same starting line. I mean, where you end up as the gun goes off, we'll find out. I mean, but at the same time, I wanted a certain kind of democracy, that everyone was looked at equally. And you could be obviously the individual within the photograph and the group and the mass group of all these schools. So like I said, you could go sort of, in a very sort of microscopic way to a telescopic way. But at the same time, there are individuals in those photographs, but at the same time, there's a society which is going to sort of shape that individual. So that somehow you want to get, by having the scale, you had an idea of the sort of, you had the idea of the scale of the people, of the number of people who were sort of, in a certain kind of, search for the future, as it were. It had to have a certain kind of weight and magnitude in order to sort of have a certain idea of, where we could have an idea of what the possibilities could be. Again, it's just trying to sort of, within an exhibition, within this sort of presentation, what you're trying to do is to get across the scope and the scale of, this sort of community.
And Maria, the scale of it wasn't just, I mean, first of all, there was a curation, but then there was the offer, if you like, the kind of the idea that on the one hand you have these still pictures, but then you had the live models, if you like, coming in on a mass and relentless scale. Can you talk to us a little bit about the logistics of that?
Well, I mean, as with much of Steve's work, there's a central, simple concept that is underpinned by deeply complex thinking and organization. And I think I arrived at Tate as director as Steve was kind of presenting this idea. And I mean, it's compelling instantly. And I'm always keen to say yes, and especially to artists like Steve. But also my mother was a primary school teacher. So, you know, my whole life was punctuated by those photographs, because every year she would be photographed with her class, and it changed as well. So I really got what Steve was trying to do. But so you say yes, and then you start to think about how on earth do you reach all the schools in London, and Steve's ambition to reach all of them. I knew absolutely was not ever going to be possible, because not every school is ready and able even to take up an offer as wonderful as this. There's many, many complex things they're wrestling with. But I knew we had to make that the offer. And the only way of doing that was to work with other organisations. Tate's big, but, you know, we run central London spaces, and one in Liverpool and one in St Ives. We're not local and resident in Bexley Heath or in Waltham Forest. And we needed to work with other organisations that were. So there's a brilliant organisation I had known way back in my earlier career, and they're called A New Direction. And they do arts education. That is their thing. They support teachers. They encourage schools to engage with the arts and really advocate for how vital that is for all children. But they had the networks. And then their idea was that the best way to get schools to really engage, especially if they hadn't engaged with Tate before, was to get the schools who do come to speak for the value of it. So schools like the one that Steve went to became champions for the project. And they helped us connect to schools that Tate didn't know. We did so much work for a year to really assess what was needed to make this project fly. And so we found out the parts of London that we don't reach well, or that we'd never reached before. We sent people out to talk to head teachers, and got head teachers to talk to other head teachers, and reception school teachers to talk to other reception school teachers. And gradually we built up to just over 1,500 schools. And that's not 100% of the schools in London, but it's 70%. And my hard-nosed learning team had said the best you'll ever do is 50%. And I'm not sure if we ever even told that to Steve. So we really did get far, and we needed to, because to make the project come together, it really did have to speak to all of London. And when those schools came, because every school got to work with arts workers as part of making the photograph, and they knew it was coming into Tate, and they knew they would then be invited as their school and then with their own parents. But as they came in, it caused wonderful courageous mayhem every day. And I saw it every day, because we had to build a porter cabin kind of extra lobby in the car park to give a place for the school groups to leave their bags and for everything to be done safely. And everybody would, and then they would walk, and they happened to walk past my office. So at certain points in the day, there would suddenly be this wave of noise that moved through the spaces at Tate. And that's a really powerful thing. So this artwork created a different environment in the whole museum, because you started to hear the voices of the future, asking lots of, first of all, finding themselves in the heart of the National Museum, and squealing and giggling and taking the mick out of each other and doing all of those things that 7- and 8-year-olds do, but then asking lots of questions.
So this kind of arrival, this kind of noise, a bit like starlings, I imagine, as kind of that has this symbiotic effect of changing the environment and themselves being changed by the environment. The first time I was introduced to it was actually in my local tube station, when I saw this huge picture, which I found just quite mesmerizing. And then occasionally I would see them on billboards around the city. And Paul, you wrote in your afterward, the year 3 billboards inserted unruly quotidian humanity into the e-regulated sheen of the consumer dreamscape of the e-attention economy, fast fashion, perfection and transient fantasy, this kind of incursion of the banal almost. We've all been in these pictures, as opposed to the pictures that we usually see on those billboards, which nobody that I know could ever be in those pictures. Can you just tell us a bit about what you meant by that?
Well, I mean, I know we're not supposed to use the word multiculturalism anymore, but this is a very, there's a language that is the official language of integration and diversity and so on. But actually, what I like about, one of the things that I think is amazing about this as an imaginative intervention is the kind of unruly, what I would say, Creole character, actually, of the city that's being summoned into being. And it's an exercise in creating something out of the idea of a common culture, of a common citizenship, of a shared, almost a shared future in a country, in a culture, which is much more comfortable looking at the past than it is looking forwards. And that's a measure of the damage that the racial order does to our common life. So for me, the untidy, the messy, these are children after all, right? So to represent them in the billboards and out and about in those places, at the bus stops, in the tube and so on, it pushes, it changes, it damages the sense of time that you think with, and it forces you to address the future that we turn away from, or we can't imagine very easily.
I mean, there is something I think that is challenging for those who are anxious about London's multicultural future, which is, on the one hand, there is this creolity, this mixture, and on the other hand, they're 7 and 8, which makes them a kind of very difficult place to place your anxiety, whereas they are the future. I want to read you this quote from John Cleese, that this occurred just not long before I spoke to Steve. John Cleese, who lives in the Caribbean, it should be said, no, London is no longer an English city. In 2011, he told an Australian audience, I love having different cultures around, but when the parent culture kind of dissipates, you're left thinking, well, what's going on? And he'd also previously declared, I love being in Bath because it feels like the England that I grew up in. These pictures, in a sense, are a challenge, if only to the imagination, but I think to more than that. And so I want to ask you first, Steve, when you talk about the future, this is about the future. And it's about the future of London and also the future of Britain, in a sense. What is it that you want to say about the future?
Well, first, I have to mention a very important person in the making of this exhibition, Clary Wallace, who was the curator of this exhibition. Who was absolutely incredible in making all this stuff happen with the year 3, with the teaching things and which went on, the extra curriculum things for the kids, and organizing an exhibition. She was absolutely incredible and amazing. First and foremost, the future. I mean, I just wanted to have a situation. It's very difficult to look at the future. It's like looking into the sun in a way. It's difficult. It's painful. It's like what to expect. There's a lot of anxiety, but at the same time, you've got to be courageous. And it's the most difficult thing one could really think about, because there's a lot of fear there. But it's what we have to do. And sometimes there's some beautiful things in there. And also, what's so beautiful about the future is possibilities. Everything, there's a but maybe, and that's all I have to have, a but maybe, to sort of have some kind of idea or having a second wind of moving forward. So in some ways, I wanted to represent that, but maybe what could happen, and it's in their hands. But also, yes, the storm clouds are gathering, but regardless of what anyone thinks, this is the future. There's no denying it. You can't. You could close your eyes to it, and be blind to it. But what we were representing at Tate Britain was the future, regardless of if you like it or not. This is it. And in fact, I think it was the only place ever to represent it visually.
There is, Paul, or there could be a sense, if you traveled not far, probably an hour and a half out of London, of people saying, well, that's your future. It's not mine. This is a future. London, you write in your forward, a cultural wedge has been driven between London and everywhere else. Experience differs greatly between big cities and small towns, north and south, red walls and blue rinses, but these divisions project opposed conceptions of the country's past and uncertain future. There is a specificity in this, isn't it? That it is of kind of demographic geography. This is the future of London. How do you think that's understood both in and outside of London? Where does that lie?
Well, I think at the moment, for many, many years, it's been understood through the idea of belonging. And the crisis of England and English national identity, which is not, of course, something that we find at the same intensity in other parts of the United Kingdom. We don't find it in Northern Ireland or in Wales or in Scotland in quite the same way. The question of who belongs to England and what England is to belong to is complicated by London's blooming, London's kind of excessive, a pleasurable, exotic image, which clashes, I think, really clashes very sharply with the inability of England to imagine a future for itself. And I think it boils down at the moment really to an argument that we hear a lot beginning to be discussed, and that's the idea of replacement. It's the idea of replacement, that this future, this anxiety-inducing future, the plurality, if you like, the diversity, I don't like that word, that represents the replacement of a knowable white England, the Cleese England, with something unknown, something dangerous, something threatening, something frightening, actually, something deeply frightening. And it goes, I suppose this has been the rule, this has been the law, this has been the poem, since 1968, the idea that these different people have the whip hand over the locals, over the indigenous, if you like, because they do use that idea of indigeneity. So for me, one of the things about this work, which is so exciting, is that it enters that space and it troubles that space. It's a challenge, it's a provocation, it's an invitation to think through that problem.
Was it intended as a provocation, Steve?
No, it's the truth. I didn't have to try it. I didn't have to flex a muscle. I just wanted to portray what's out there. It's there it is. There's sunflowers, and these are kids at school. That's how it is. Again, there's that sort of it's a moment in time, and now these kids. How old are these kids now? These photographs were taken 2019, I think. They're very different. To how they were then, and we have no idea how they progress, especially through COVID and the unfortunate situation with lockdown and how things have been so terrible for school children during that time.
But can I just say something about the color of the pictures? And someone, I think it was you or perhaps it was Steve earlier on, spoke about the democratic aspect of the the way the show's organized, the size, the scale question. I mean, I just want to draw attention to the color in these images, in the uniforms, in the walls, in the floors, in the clothing that the teachers wear, in the clothing that the children wear. The richness and complexity of the palette that's there is asking questions about color, which seem to be relevant to this story, just as the photographs themselves ask questions about what forms of difference count as being different enough to be different within the framework of this kind of explosion of humanity that's so vividly conjured.
And there's something really important about the work that Clary did with Steve around how it is curated, because there's an absolute rigor and standardization. And there was so much argument about this, but it's essential in my view, because it is one work, but it's many, and it is absolutely standardized. It's the same format, it's the same size, the grid layout, but it is absolutely differentiated. And to my mind, it's that tension that makes it a really challenging work, because it doesn't let people turn away from it. And so whilst you might have, people traveling from parts of the UK that don't look like London, they do all have primary schools still. They do all see kids in the same uniforms. They do see these groups gathered and marshaled by their teachers. They're all sitting just as Steve's class was sitting when he was 7 years old. And so even if they don't want this London, it's still their experience. This is what we put our kids through at school and wherever they are in the UK. And it's that tension between the standardization and rigor and the absolute gleeful chaos and the richness of color and the variety and difference of all the schools. That's what I think underlies its power.
And there was, as well as the kind of the challenge in terms of our imagination of the future, the challenge of color, the challenge to the polity, there was kind of a challenge to the Tate in there as well, wasn't there? First of all, whether the Tate could accommodate this, but it's interesting, I think, to think that when I first spoke to Steve about this, it was pre-pandemic, pre-George Floyd, pre the latest iteration of Black Lives Matter. It was post the Brexit referendum, but pre-Brexit actually happening. It was pre quite a lot of stuff. It was during Trump. And in a sense, it was a preview of a series of challenges that would emerge in the art world, right? About who are we serving? How are we serving them? How can we open our doors? And so I wanted to just hear from you, Maria, about that challenge with, 3 years on, 3 years in a pandemic and an uprising on. What does that look like?
Well, it's had a really profound impact because of all of those challenges that we faced. And Alex Farquharson as director at Tate Britain and Clary, they wanted this project from the first. It was a project that coincided, as I said, with my arrival, and I wanted to help Steve make that happen. But I don't think so that we wanted it to be organization changing as well as life changing as an experience. But I don't think we could have even imagined how valuable it would be and how much it would give us to build on. Because the schools in all their plurality really did come, and they came right up to the point that the pandemic closed the schools. And we decided at that point to not take it down. And still one of the most bizarre and profound things I think I experienced during the pandemic was walking around the Tate Britain galleries when they were completely empty, when we were in the third long lockdown, and discovering two curators in a room that they had turned into what looked like a 1950s post room. And they spent 2 weeks in the galleries, which weren't being used by the public, packaging up the photographs and sending them out to schools, because the post room wasn't available for them to actually send them to. So they just found a way of doing it. So the organization rose to the challenge that this project posed for us. And some of that was just really, really profound. And what I see now is that it gave us the trust from the public to be able to do the things that are now helping the organization kind of reconnect to a public post-pandemic. So the British Caribbean show, Life Between Islands, which had been a long-held idea by Alex Farquharson, developed in a much more collaborative way because of all that we learned. And it met an audience that wanted to come, that believed it might be fun and challenging and interesting. And so we're seeing the benefit of putting some roots down in London that this project helped us do. So it is for the future as a project. It's helped us, it's given us some of the energy and focus that we've needed to navigate the incredibly difficult world and societal events that we've experienced in the last couple of years.
Did you see that coming, Steve?
No. Well, I did want it to be like a Trojan horse in a way. Yeah, I did want it to sort of, have an impact where people maybe didn't expect it to have an impact. Because I just think the power of the imagination of children. And I know for a fact that we have within that group of people, of course, there'll be people who will be impacted by it, but also the fact that those kids could bring their parents and bring their grandparents to a space more than likely they wouldn't have gone to ever, or in the first place, to see their child or see their grandchild or see their friend or see their uncle. I mean, the uncle seeing their nephew or niece on the walls in a way that they never thought they would see them. So to bring people within an institution and to feel that they have ownership of it, but also to feel that they could be a part of something, and that they can actually, possibly be an artist, possibly have an idea of, also seeing other things within the institution, to be in a space that they would never have been thought that they could be in before. So there's so many, I know that, and I'm going on a bit, but I know what happened to me when I first went to the Tate on a school bus.
How old were you?
I was near enough the same age.
Right.
And walking around and thinking, oh, the things that I'm sort of scribbling in my notebooks at home or whatever, I could paint, wherever I could do things. There was a place for this. There was a place of importance for this. And I think that was the first inkling. I remember seeing someone like Edward Burrough for the first time, these paintings in Harlem and things like that, and thinking, those things have, for a child of that age, have a huge impression. So that's what I wanted to do. That was my intention.
I mean, one of the issues is that we're losing exactly that experience. It has never been harder for schools to bring children to museums or theatres. It's never been harder for them to find a space for art in the curriculum or for any kind of creativity. Mm-hmm. So for me, Year 3 was also about making just a really plain statement about the essential nature of art as part of a child's education. Because, for me, a teacher put me in their Mini and drove me to listen to a poet when I was doing English literature in secondary school, and it was life-changing for me.
Did you grow up in London, Maria?
No, I grew up in Northampton.
Right.
And she had to drive me to Birmingham to hear the poet. So it was like a big effort by this teacher. But so many of us can remember that teacher who took us somewhere that took our minds somewhere else. And that's partly that's what museums are for. We are part of the collective cultural education, and we must make a much stronger argument to government about how vital that is?
I mean, I was 17 before I went. I didn't live in London either, but I only lived 30 miles away in Stevenage. I was 17 before I went to the Tate.
Oh.
And that was the first art museum I'd been to. I'm just wondering, Paul, what your experience, you were raised in London, born in London.
I can remember being dragged around the Tate before I could appreciate it, and extremely bored and mystified, puzzled. I wasn't, I didn't draw. I just couldn't understand why there was so much. There was so much of it, because it seemed to demand something in terms of concentration, the intensity of your engagement with these very demanding things. And I was exhausted, I think, after about 10 minutes,
Yeah, I remember just not being, I went with a friend who was 19 and frankly, just a bit more sophisticated. And I remember not quite understanding what was being asked of me, which is a different way of saying I didn't know how to behave. I mean, I knew, in some ways not to behave, but I didn't actually know how to behave. It was a somewhat alien space where science museums, natural history museums, those kind of things, I was much more familiar and comfortable with. And it took me a while. It did actually take me a while to figure it out. I just want to go back, Steve, to something that you said to me a while back, and I want to bring Paul in on this as well. That I described the exhibition in a way like a love letter that you were writing to London, and you'd said, I need this city because it's given me so much. It's given me my belief system. It's given me my viewpoint on life. And I just wonder if both you and could talk about, as two in this conversation who grew up in this city, where you stand with it in terms of your fondness, affection, or otherwise. What is it about London?
But it's the turmoil, actually, and the feeling that the London that formed me anyway isn't there anymore, and there's a constant process of. I think that's what city life is. That you can't freeze it. You learn that it can't be frozen. That you have to find that tempo, and learn to dwell with the tempo of ceaseless transformation and reinvention, and I think this piece taps into that problem of it's not a problem. It taps into the challenge of finding that tempo, the tempo of that city life, and it's a remarkable thing actually in London, because it's almost like a sort of organic exposure to otherness, to difference, that is incredibly precious, I think, and rare. I'm not saying that the city isn't segregated, but it's segregated very unevenly and very untidily, and obviously the horror of the moment that we're in now, around food and rent and all of these things that are changing the city again for the worse. That's changing the tempo too. Actually, I think that's changing the tempo too, and how cultural institutions or art people who are making art respond to that suffering. It is suffering. Respond to that suffering outside. It's going to be interesting to see how people respond to that.
For me, it's kind of like the layers of London. There's these layers, and the past can sometimes come into the present, and the present, sort of obviously takes from the past. And it's just so rich. I mean, yes, I do have a nostalgia for certain things, of course, because what you grow up with, but also my eyes are always turning and looking at things which are new in London. It's always surprising because it's quite unique here, more than anywhere that I know of, and it always excites me. And I'm always looking what people are wearing. For example, I'm always. The street of London are just so fascinating. It has its own swag, in one way, shape, form, or the other. It's the smell of food or how people even move. There is these sort of senses from the past, but also of the future, and I just love it. It gives me a lot. But yes, we're in a situation right now where people. I think we're in a really interesting time. Again, obviously, I don't know. I really do trust that we will sort of persevere, but it's difficult. And also, what you often do is look at the past to find out what the future might be, and it's always wrong. It always has a way of biting us in the ass, and sort of surprising us, because a lot of predictions about look what happened 10 years ago. Well, it's gonna happen. This is what happened. No, it's gonna always sort of come up and hit you in the face, and we will see what that is, or how hard it hurts, or not. Maybe it's a caress. Maybe it's a kiss. I'm hoping.
I want to move on now to some audience questions, some of which are really quite moving kind of testimony. There's two I want to pose. They are primarily to Steve and Maria. Jane asked, will you be doing a follow-up to the project, either with that year group at age 18, for example, or maybe future year threes? I think there's an image there of the kind of 7-Up series or something like that, taking that same group. And then Sarah says, my question is whether you had any plans to follow up on the project. I was one of the schools who came in March 2020, so just before lockdown. I had moved up to year 4 with the same cohort. We had such a lovely day. We were directed to the Turner Galleries by staff who were sensitive to the makeup of my class. They came to find us towards the end of the visit, as the children were still there, absorbed in the paintings. I thought it was a really good memory to take into lockdown and build into the online learning. So it's a lovely message. Both of them both of them have at their root. Where do we go from here with this? Is there any notion of, not least because it was cut short in its prime?
Well, I think the images hopefully will be assembled together some time in the future and exhibited. But I think the images year 3 is a testament of that time, of lockdown, of George Floyd, of what the future could hold. I think it's almost like a time capsule for now, and I think that's how it should remain. There's no part 2. It's unique because of what happened at that moment. It can never be repeated. And again, I think what Clary Wallace did as far as with the after school stuff and was incredible, because I think it became more than just a sort of an exhibition. It became a whole kind of movement of trying to sort of get kids back into art education. So the photographs as an artwork in itself is we could talk about that all day, as well as what was going on obviously behind the camera. So I think it was a unique time, and I think it was a moment. Yeah.
And I mean, I would only add to that, it has entered the collection, so it can be reassembled, but I think it is itself. And so I'm with Steve, it shouldn't be redone. But all of the legacy, the learning, all of the work that Clary did with colleagues, the learning team here, and many experiments that were now embedded. So Jane's class can and should come back. We saw a massive surge in school visits after the difficulties of the pandemic to bring to Life Between Islands, because the teachers said that the exhibition was both so useful and so reflective of the classes and communities that they were part of. So we try to create for schools the kind of experience they had when they came to see Year 3. But I think there's one other thing about the future, which is that when those kids turn 18, I won't be director here. Steve will be making something else. But of course, the director then may choose to speak to Steve again, do something out, put a call out to everyone in those photographs to come and find themselves again. Who knows? You know, it's an artwork. It will keep doing its work.
I want to just stress, if you'd like to put a question or comment forward at any point, just use the Q&A button. Please include your name if you'd like us to read it out. Haley, Steve, asks, what was the most fulfilling part of the Year 3 exhibition for you? As a parent of a child who was lucky enough to have been involved, for me, it was being able to go to the Tate and see the sheer enormity of the project and know that my child had been a tiny part of the history that was made.
I think the most fulfilling thing was working with the Tate and you know, the team and the photographers and with the children, really. I mean, being with the kids and being with those, you know, and having to have that kind of impact on that, I mean, I was looking for me, of course. I was looking for what would I want at that time. And that's what I wanted, just to sort of, to give people an opportunity. And that was the most thing which sort of touched me the most, where I could actually have contact with these children and talk to them, and they could point to where they were and, you know, pull me, drag me over here, and having that kind of conversation. So it was, you know, the fact that what's so wonderful about the whole thing was we as a team could do anything. I think working with Tate, working with Clary, working with the photographers, working with the children, working with Maria, you know, it was just one of those things where look what we could do if we just put our minds to it, and what kind of impact we can have just through the simplest sort of you know, ideas and the presentation. It's pretty empowering, and I hope that everyone could take from that, really. You know, that's it. It was wonderful to be in a team.
Mm.
Paul, because I spent some of the evening at the opening with you. Was there anything that kind of struck you particularly at the time?
Well, what really struck me at the time was the scale, the magnitude of it, and actually how that conjures up different ways of thinking with the idea that everybody has been in that picture. Mm-hmm. And what you do with that realization, actually. So it's not just about the future. It's about creating a kind of common sense of belonging and attachment in circumstances that don't really allow that to be felt most of the time. So that for me was remarkable, actually. And I also really just enjoyed people coming in and looking for themselves, loudly searching for their school or searching for their friends. And there was a lot, even that night before it was really public, there was a lot of that activity going on. So you got a sense of how much more of it was about to descend on the Tate at that in response to the show, you know.
Yeah, I remember not quite realizing how big it was, and so saying to someone, "I'll catch you in a minute." Like, we were going to split up, but like, I'll see you in a bit. And of course, I just never saw them again because it was like a couple of football pitches inside. So it's a question from John. I can answer the first bit, I think, where he says, "Did this include private schools?" Which it did. But then there's a question, were there inequalities obvious in the photos if they were included?
That's an interesting question.
It is an interesting question. Mm-hmm. My impression is that it wasn't that obvious, actually. Maybe in terms of the size of the classes.
Maybe. I think you have to squint. You have to think. I think you'll be surprised which were and which weren't. I think, presentation. If anything about the British schools, it's all about that, isn't it? And again, if I imagine if we move the camera a little bit this way, then we will say, okay, well, that school is this. So it's very interesting that, you know, it was sometimes very difficult to detect that, obviously, but you know.
Yeah, and the standardized format again worked to resist that. And I mean, not every school was in school uniform, but most were. You could make some guesses about, as he says, class size, but then sometimes that was for other reasons.
Yeah.
But also, I love that fact that would be disguised as such, because it makes you give every single child a possibility, a chance, before they're prejudged, because they will be prejudged anyway. But so therefore, there's a sort of a level, to some extent, a level playing field.
The thing that I was caught short with any number of times as I panned through was the occasional Roman Catholic, or in one case, a Greek Orthodox school, where there would be hijabs or things that were clearly kind of not part of Catholicism or the Greek Orthodox tradition, and just seeing the degree to which we were kind of dealing with a kind of Babel here, a kind of, you know, cacophony of kind of cultures and ways of identifying. Sarah asks, and I will put an addendum to this. She says, thank you for the speakers, for your work over the years and for inspiring us. Will this exhibition travel, and or has it inspired other such exhibitions or movements in other parts of the world? And I do think that's an interesting one. Like, what does London look like to Birmingham? But also, does London doing this maybe prompt Birmingham or Leicester or somewhere else to kind of do a version for themselves, a kind of year 3 franchise?
I hope so. I mean, that'd be great. It'd be great to see.
There's been a lot of conversation, because Tate's part of a really wide network of museums and galleries, of course, who all have their own relationships with schools. You know, they're called the Plus Tate Network. There's more than 60 of them now, across the 4 nations. And they didn't want to do the same or at the same time, but it prompted so much debate about the museum or gallery's responsibility to its wider schools communities. And so there will be things that just unfold from that. And I think different museums will seek to address, if you like, the same question, but in different ways. But it was just that whole network of museums championed the project itself. They kind of sent messages about it out to their schools' networks, so that we were really celebrating, not just on behalf of London, but on behalf of the UK.
There's a question here from Asif Khan in Edinburgh. This one's for you, Paul, and he's interested in your remark about London blossoming whilst the rest of England is unable to see a future for itself. That's his paraphrasing. And he asks, is this healthy or sustainable? And will London's development cause tension or inspiration?
Well, I can't see into the future, but I mean, obviously the government understand the risks involved in some of this, otherwise they wouldn't talk about levelling up in the way that they do. I mean, it seems to me that what the promise of this is the idea that you can take pleasure and delight in the differences which are made visible here without feeling anxious in without feeling that they threaten you or that you're competing with anybody. That there's an invitation to joy and to humanity. And, you know, I mean, it sounds corny, but I don't mean it in a corny way, that it's asking you questions about what is really different. It is. I mean, I probably, you know, not everybody wants to think about it in this way, but by putting up this proliferation of difference, it says, well, what is different? What is actually really different? And what is so different that it would make you frightened or anxious? And I think that those are good questions for art to ask. So I'm very happy that those questions are being asked so loudly. And And that's not to take anything away from the anxieties people have. They have their anxieties, right? But there's a chance here to work through the history that produced all this difference. And that's something that England will have to do if England's going to have a future.
Do you get a sense that, because that demands work.
Yeah.
And this is really for, not just for you, but for anything. Is Britain prepared to do the work, or England or London, whichever category you want to take, to engage with this future? Because there is Steve says this is the future. This is the future. So this is what you are going to have to get on board in order to engage with it and understand it. But then you have John Cleese just being one example. There's a current out there that resists the future. Are they prepared to do the work to make this future work? Because that's the other thing they could do, is say, okay, that's the future. We're going to make sure it doesn't work.
Happen, yeah. Well, you know how divided people are right now. So some of them will and some of them won't. And we can't know what the balance is going to end up being. I don't think, I would like to be able to say that, I think a lot of more people in this country than we often like to admit want to live in a normal country. They want to live in a country that's like every other country, that aspires to a democracy that's substantive, that wants a state that wasn't just made to, act to manage an empire, but actually operates in the interest of the people that live locally. So for me, all of that's pending in these images. How do we want to live? What kind of not just what kind of a city, what kind of a country do we want to be? And how are we going to invent institutions? How are we going to invent a system of education that's adequate to that task? And of course, yeah, some people are more threatened by that possibility than anything else. It's existential for them. But the way this project works in the future as well as in the past offers them other possibilities.
Yeah, and the work is happening, not everywhere, but the Catholic primary school with many kids who are Muslim is in Birmingham also, and it's in Manchester. And I know because my kids went through those schools. And it is in many more places sometimes than we let ourselves think about. But again, the power of this work is that the connectedness to years age 7 and 8. And Steve said something very important to me quite early on about that being the time where children start to look to the world to understand it, rather than just looking to their parents. And so the optimism of this piece is that you could look to the world and you would see yourself in every form that we have in this country. And so it's telling a story of what is happening, as Steve said. It is going on, not everywhere, but it's going on anyway.
Steve, I want to, in the short time that we have left, I want to give the last word to you, that you looked at that picture, you were looking to the future. Did you imagine, was anywhere in your imagination of your future actually the life that you have now?
No, not at all. Not at all, at all, whatsoever. And also, yeah, I don't know how that happened, but you know what? I had possibilities, and I think, when I didn't have to pay to go to university to be an artist, that was huge. I would now go, to turn the clocks back. If I was now, I wouldn't have gone to art school, because the fact that I had to pay for it. I have a debt. There's no way my parents or what they ever said. What's an artist? How are you going to earn that money back? The whole idea of being in debt before you even sort of could put one foot in front of the other to go, it was impossible. And the fact that we're losing all these amazing artists, designers, architects through the possibility of not being able to sort of pay, fees is so. Yes, I didn't really see myself doing what I was doing, but even less, way less so now. because I don't think I even got into first base. I mean, all I needed was the door open a little bit. That's all. And now it seems like it's sort of very much closed. I don't know.
Well, sadly, we've run out of time. I want to end on a kind of hopeful note, which is that you couldn't see yourself then. And so we don't know what we can't see.
Absolutely.
Right? That, in the same way that you could look at that picture and not know that there was an Oscar-winning, Turner Prize-winning person in that picture. We look in these pictures and all kinds of wonderful things.
Yeah, like I said, you look 10 years in the past to sort of think about the future, and it could be a caress, or it could be a kiss, or it could be a punch on the nose. Who knows?
Well, let's relish in the possibility that it could be a caress,
Absolutely.
that it could be a kiss. And with that, I want to thank you, Steve McQueen, Professor Paul Gilroy, and Maria Balshaw for joining me. My name's Gary Younge. This is Gary. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And if you don't already have a copy of Year 3, it is out. It's out now. Thank you.
Beautiful.